When you're a child and you ask your parents how babies get made, you get told it's grown-up talk. When a girl wears a long face and you ask her what for, she'll tell you she's fine. When you ask why Tower 7 fell at free fall speed when no planes hit it, you get told you're a conspiracy nut. I'd be hard-boiled to even estimate the potential of the internet, but into the trash it goes as long as thought-terminating cliches like those keep the shadows on the cave wall attractive. For paranoid schizophrenics like me and you, anytime something gets labeled a conspiracy theory, it becomes 10 times more credible due to the fact that anything deemed false by the mainline is probably true. But for everybody else, believing in conspiracy theories is like being gay in Nigeria. Interestingly enough, the label of conspiracy theories is exclusively right-wing. In fact, not once have I seen left-wing and conspiracy theory within a 500-meter radius of each other. Although still technically theories regarding conspiracies, claiming Europeans invented the concepts of God, family, race, and property thousands of years ago in order to systematically exploit the poor black man is backed by prestigious universities, making them historical facts. Cui bonos for losers. White people would totally sink billions of dollars just to make random colored people suffer because their skin is brown. Strange how skepticism of the establishment is associated with right-wingedness. Stranger yet is how the term conspiracy theorist first appeared in a CIA document from 1967 about combating government skepticism, where they admit to controlling media narratives. You probably know what MKUltra is because you watched a YouTube video about Stranger Things, but what you probably don't know is that it succeeded. If it had failed, they'd never let you know about it. But because the response has been accounted for and muzzled, they don't care. Just like they didn't care about releasing Kennedy's unexplainable autopsy to the public. Just like they didn't care about doming Epstein in front of everyone. Because demoralized people can't assess true information. Demoralization was the brainwashing method used by the Soviets, as exposed by Yuri Bezmenov. Which brings me to my next point. People who still stagger with fear before the wingnut Stacy stare will say that all extremism is bad, so we shouldn't focus on what kind. If there were a right-wing equivalent to LGBT-friendly public schools telling kids cucumbers are great to tickle your cervix with, I'd agree. The reason why left-wing ideology has to be fought more than right-wing ideology is simple. The radical right-wing governments of the 20th century failed. The radical left-wing governments of the 20th century didn't. The Cold War was diversionary, the Berlin Wall was decorative, and communism won. Weren't for the USSR, the CIA wouldn't have been founded. To the dismay of leftists, the evil neoconservative American empire would go on to sabotage the teeming communist governments and replace them with stinky democracy. To my dismay, I see the worldwide spread of democracy as indistinguishable from Trotsky's Fourth International. The most effective victory your opponent can achieve is making you adopt his methods to defeat him, thus making you the greatest exponent of his credo. Following the trend of federal institutions doing exactly the opposite of what they purport to do, the CIA furthered left-wing interests. Nothing better could have happened than having the US populace believe that centralizing power in the hands of the state to win the Cold War was a win for capitalism. The greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world he didn't exist, or, in this case, that he had been defeated. Speaking of the devil, his children are awful industrious, considering how prevalent they were in Soviet leadership, including big names like Lenin and the aforementioned Trotsky. Coincidentally, they composed most of the neoconservative intellectuals who got the war in Iraq started, which was powerfully motivated by 9/11, mind you, which also involved a fellow named Larry, who was of a particular ethnic and religious background I can't quite recall at this moment, who just happened to collect double the insurance money from the attacks. Political representatives in the US government are also disproportionately of the same persuasion. Notable examples include Paul Warburg, the driving force behind the Federal Reserve Act, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Moon Ra wielding a gavel and a vagina, and Bernie Sanders, a 200-year-old Muppet terrified of black women. As it turns out, the cunning rhetoric of these people stems from an age-old Talmudic practice called pill pull. In the Old Testament, rabbinical authorities who wanted to run their communities in ways that weren't exactly kosher would do this in order to twist the Jewish law in their favor. This got to the point where the Talmud itself gets altered whenever they want. There was another guy in the Bible who was fond of making up his own rules, and if I remember correctly, this awesome guy even proposed to let Jesus rule all the kingdoms of the world. During Jesus' trial, one of those rabbinical authorities got trolled so bad he got naked, he was so mad. But I digress. In debates, pill pull fundamentally means passing enough gas on your opponent's face so that he's too blown away by your folly foul odor to produce a rebuttal. In my debate with Destiny, I experienced it firsthand, and I had similar experiences when the kids in my school began saying how ugly I was and how much I hurt the feelings of Muslims. I won't go over it again since Be Not Afraid did the best possible job of it, but it's surprising how easily gay Muslims or otherwise paradoxical minorities can get possessed by the spirit of geriatric Semites. Of course, demoralization needs the media in order to maintain the narrative, and surprise, surprise, guess who overflows it? They even play act conspiracy theories, or men's rights activists who believe the earth is flat and stay-at-home moms who don't want Obama to inject their kids with autism are going to melt the ice caps. Since it's much easier to lie than to disprove a falsehood, things like Pizzagate are never approached head-on. Instead, they just shift attention by attacking claims advocates of conspiracy theories never actually made. The energy to fact-check the deluge of sewage coming out of their mouths is a quality exclusively possessed by Alex Jones. If you do take the time to sift through it though, you start reaching some conclusions. A good rule of thumb for it is finding out who you aren't allowed to criticize, and this is where things get trickier. The reason why democracy was favored over communism is because it makes the culprits much harder to pinpoint. Stalin's national communism was too similar to an autocracy, which is evident in that countries that adopted it swung back into being nationalist and right-wing almost seamlessly, such as Poland, Hungary, and even Russia. China swung back into some sort of bizarre neoliberalism, but I refrain from mentioning it because that cesspool is unexplainable. In a democracy, power is spread across too many people for you to ever know how much influence each one of them holds. When things go sour, there's no one to blame, no tyrant to overthrow. Putting aside the fact that Stalin most likely got assassinated for trying to expose the Jewish doctor's plot thing, his death did mean a weakening blow to the Soviet Union because he was seen as the head of state. If our leader dies, who cares? Presidency is so distant. We're never actually that invested in anyone who gets elected. Even when we do like them, they'll be gone in 4 years. And in the time they were there, the Senate will have put so many sticks in their spokes that they'll have failed to fulfill the campaign promises they were voted in for. Wait in the swamp long enough and you'll realize that the problem is bigger than just the puddle you're standing in. The apparatus that enables the alienation of sovereignty from local communities and into politburos chock full of people holding dual citizenships. However more accurate this too is very difficult to fight against. It's doubtless the state is immoral, but how do you strike back effectively? Which institutions? Which politicians? On what grounds? What about their supporters? This demand for a higher level of abstraction begets dismissal from left-wingers and impatience out of right-wingers. Political actors not only fail to see the forest for the trees, they also forgo any thought of the seeds. Solzhenitsyn asserted, with extreme prejudice to the USSR, that the corruption of the individual is what brings about a corrupt order, and the maintenance of the individual and only that can undo corruption. There are no quick solutions to implement, no ideologies to adopt, no politicians to elect, no acts, laws, or subsidies that you can pass that can make people refrain from wickedness. If people didn't heed to the directly God-given 10 Commandments, why would the words of a man-made constitution matter? I've spoken of the flesh before, and now I've come to speak of the world. This is not the first time corrupt order has been upon humanity, and it certainly will not be the last, especially as the average IQ of the voter regresses to a mean so low that mathematics cannot even conceive it. Relying on the world for morals is like relying on a stingray for a welcome mat. If you have faith in an entity that can print money and commit theft, yet still manages to get itself into infinite debt, you should be receiving disability checks from it. Remember, the Jews manipulated the Gentile state to kill Jesus Christ, the Son of God. I've made this point before, but your politics do not matter, and they never will. If you donate $100,000 to Bernie Sanders, it can be instantly negated in the eyes of left-wingers if you follow it up by calling Oprah a porch monkey. Your being is comprised of the actions you take. And considering you vote every 4 years and poop every 2 days at the very least, whatever amount of your being that can be categorized politically is outweighed 100-fold by the amount of feces you produce. St. Francis of Assisi held that, instead of concerning yourself with the potential reformation of a corrupt institution, you should improve yourself, lest you end up partaking in the corruption by trying to fix it from the inside. Let dead wood burn, because the alternative is artificially keeping it alive, which is unflattering to say the least. Not only that, but it's arrogant to think that you can remain uncorrupt entering an extremely corrupt structure, and on top of that, succeed in redeeming it. This is no different from naive apologists for communism who think that if it were them in power, it would have worked. You, lugubrious mutt, cannot skip over the small fries of your mundane life because you are composed entirely of small fries. As a matter of fact, if you ever came into contact with true absolute power, it'd smite you like a pneumatic hammer does to a cow. Political classifications are frustrating because of this. They fail to capture the human essence, instead labeling them with vague and pretentious denominations. A better model for personality is the Big Five, which, if you watch Jordan Peterson, you already recognize. As it says in the name, it's composed of 5 dimensions, which is interesting for a multitude of reasons. For example, the pentagram was, for a long time, a Christian symbol for the 5 senses we possess, while simultaneously symbolizing the 5 wounds of Christ. It's pithy enough that our senses are paralleled with suffering, but that's not where it stops. Space is 3-dimensional, while the 4th dimension is referred to as space-time. Time is above space, seeing as it contains multiple iterations of the same objects arranged differently at different points in time. Human beings, though, have consciousness, which can safely be assumed to constitute personhood or personality. And we see things not as they are in space-time, but tools that can serve a purpose. We see everything as relative to our consciousness, and if personhood or personality is composed of 5 dimensions, our consciousness is 5-dimensional. Following the Christian representations, our eternal soul, which possesses free will, may best be represented by our conscience. Considering scientists have failed to find any materially grounded explanation for consciousness, I'm quite comfortable with attributing it with a transcendental nature. Our consciousness manifests over space and time, but it does not belong there, hence our impulse to reconnect with a higher power. This is the motif behind religion, and it gets intriguing when other belief systems are inserted into the scheme. If the 5th dimension is inhabited by conscious human beings, and the 3rd is inhabited by animals due to their lack of consciousness, then it would follow that the 4th is inhabited by beings between animals and humans. Behold, I give you Muslims. I paraphrase St. Alphonsus Liguori when I say that Islam is fit for beasts. Their creed fits the dimensional concept perfectly, as the 4th dimension is time and they pursue their extension over it inordinately, raping and having relationships with minors just as their prophet did, leaving behind innumerable descendants. And the 6th dimension, unmistakably represented by a hexagram, is Judaism. Allow me to be esoteric, but if physical reality can be represented by a cube, let's see what each religion does to it. While the Muslims bow before it, the Christians unfold it, thus unraveling a cross and proceed to get nailed to it, enduring the pain meaningfully and voluntarily. The Jews, on the other hand, tilt it. Just as a hexagon is a tilted cube, Judaism subverts reality, as is reflected in their fickle and inconsistent law, which expressly tells Jews to lie about the content of the Talmud when anyone asks about it. The hexagram that is called by them the Star of David can also represent Remphan, one of the gods the Jews engaged in idolatry with. Considering how often they do it in both the Old and New Testament, I'd say this is likely. Another interesting factoid is that Remphan means Saturn in Old Persian, and there's a hexagon on Saturn's pole. Not convinced? How about the fact that, in the New Testament, Remphan is paired with Moloch, the Canaanite god of child sacrifice? Suddenly things like Pizzagate, circumcision and open secret, and Planned Parenthood's fetal body part trafficking start clicking together and making a whole lot more sense. Check the star on the idol of Moloch placed outside of the Colosseum and tell me what it looks like. There are plenty of interesting considerations to be derived from this, such as the etymology of the word Kabbalah from Jewish mysticism, Kaaba meaning cube and Allah meaning God, or how the Pythagorean tetrad represents the 4th dimension pretty well at that. The one we'll be covering the most in the next video, however, is the answer to the question of where all this wickedness comes from. After all, Adam and Eve didn't eat the apple out of their own resolve. The serpent led them to it. Take note, because soon enough they'll stop thinking that demons are cool and realize demons are actually cold. Get your coats ready, folks. We're heading south.